Peace, family. This is your brother Marc Lamont Hill. Today is day 98 of Israel's war on Gaza. And as promised, we're going to continue to cover right here on the Marc Lamont Hill official YouTube channel every single day of this devastating crisis. And the reason we do it, as you know, is because mainstream media absolutely is not covering it. And when they do cover it, they cover it in ways that are irresponsible. And so we're going to be here every single day to give you the updates that you need and the information that you need to know. So as you know, yesterday, was the first day of hearings at the International Court of Justice regarding South Africa's genocide case against Israel. South Africa made its case, and today, Friday, Israel had an opportunity to make their own case in their defense. The details of the case, the details of the proceedings are available on the channel, and we'll do a full breakdown later. But fundamentally, Israel made an argument at The Hague that South Africa did not have grounds to file an application because there was no existing conflict between the two countries. In other words, they were making a technical argument for why they were not guilty or why they should be found guilty. They then proceeded to make other arguments. They argued about the singularity and uniqueness of the Jewish state. They argued about anti-Semitism. They argued that what they were doing was not genocide for a variety of reasons that many people so far have not found persuasive. But again, we'll do a full breakdown of their arguments. But the point to know here is that Israel had the opportunity to defend itself in The Hague today. Another interesting note is that Western media covered Israel's defense. You could turn on major corporate media outlets and see Israel mount its defense against the charge of genocide. But yesterday, not a whole lot of media outlets were covering South Africa's argument. Not a coincidence. And again, that's the reason why we're here, because we cannot continue to normalize an environment where Israel's actions or the US's actions or France's actions or Germany's actions are ignored. We can't only have space in the ICJ or the ICC or other international bodies for African nations and Latin American nations to be found guilty or to be charged with genocide and other crimes against humanity. It has to be available for everyone, especially the powerful. That's how we have accountability. All right, family. U.S. officials announced that U.S. and United Kingdom militaries used submarine-launched Tomahawk missiles and fighter jets to bomb at least a dozen sites used by Yemen's Houthi rebel group on Thursday. This was not a surprise to many, as the United States had been promising or threatening to bomb these sites. But it's still a gross disappointment when we think about, one, the lack of authorization from the United States. The president has a duty to go to Congress for such things, and President Biden knows that. He launched a full-out social media attack against President Trump when he made strikes against Iran. And now suddenly when he's president, it's different. No, the president can't launch into war without congressional approval. That is simply a fact. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens when you subject him to the same kind of constitutional scrutiny. The other piece of this, of course, is the why of it. You know, if we understand that Yemen or the Houthis in particular, the Ansar Allah, they're making the case that they have a duty to prevent genocide. And it's an interesting legal argument, but ultimately they're saying we'll stop this when the genocide in Gaza stops. Biden is willing to organize his military power. He's willing to make legal arguments to justify bombing Yemen, but couldn't use that energy and power to stop Israeli bombs in Gaza. In other words, if he had negotiated a ceasefire, we wouldn't be here. And that's the fundamental issue. That's what we should be talking about. Hit the like button if you understand what I'm talking about. Also, y'all, I forgot. Today, I didn't ask y'all to write in where you were from. So if you're in the United States, write the city and state. From another country, write the city and the country that you're calling in from, or writing in from, or viewing in from, or listening in from. Because we always want to know where people are from, family. It's always good to see and talk to people from around the world as this daily update grows. An Israeli airstrike on a residential home killed at least 9 Palestinian civilians and injured several others in the Shoka neighborhood. That's east of Rafah in southern Gaza. That's according to Wafa, which is the Palestinian news agency. So again, we're seeing more bombings, more injuries. It's I can't even say it's stunning anymore. It's just disappointing. 9 Palestinian civilians killed just yesterday. Every 2 hours, every hour, we're seeing Palestinians killed. Every couple hours, we're seeing mothers killed. Every handful of hours, we're seeing children killed. This is a humanitarian crisis. And we're going to report all these deaths, not because we're gruesome, but because they have to be told. Local sources say that an Israeli airstrike on a vehicle killed another 8 civilians, Palestinian civilians in the Manara neighborhood of Khan Yunis. Now, again, we talk about Khan Yunis a lot around here, but Khan Yunis is in the southern part of Gaza, and a vehicle attack hits people. Now, again, are these civilians in these vehicles? Is it reasonable to assume that civilians will be in the vehicles? Does the Israeli government or military make sufficient efforts to warn the civilians in the vehicle or near the vehicle that this is going to happen? I mean, these are the questions we have to ask. Because if you're bombing private homes and you're bombing hospitals and you're bombing vehicles, you have to be sure, you have to be certain that these are all military combatants. And they simply haven't shown the evidence that it is. Speaking of homes, an Israeli bomb has killed at least 5 people after striking a home in the El Mashala neighborhood, which is near Deir el-Baleh, which is, where's Deir el-Baleh? It's sort of to the center of Gaza. It's not quite north. It's central Gaza, I guess you could say, and that's according to a few news agencies. So again, we're seeing homes being struck, we're seeing vehicles being struck, and we're seeing neighborhoods being struck. And in this time, again, it's a home. Every time so far that I've seen these homes struck, at least lately, we've seen children in those homes. We've seen women in those homes. And that's not to say women can't be combatants. I don't mean that, but these often aren't that. It's often the wives or the children or the grandmothers or the mothers of people who they decide are targets. And sometimes there's no target, no clear target anyway. Anyway, as I said, I've been saying all day, it's day 98. That means we're almost 100 days into this war on Gaza. And there's a number that is chilling to me, and that is 10,000. 10,000. What am I talking about? 10,000 children. 10,000 children. Now remember, there's 2.2 million people in the Gaza Strip, 2.1, 2.2 million, 40% of whom are children. That means that you're basically saying 1 million children are in Gaza and 10,000 of them have been killed. 10,000 have been killed. That's 1%. You talk about the standard for genocide? What are we talking about here? 1% of the total child population of Gaza has been killed. There's a report by Save the Children that breaks this all down. Y'all need to check it out. Go online, find the Save the Children report and check this out. But I don't ever want that to be lost, that 1% now of the entire population of Gazan children has been killed. Then when we add injuries, when we add maiming, the amount of Palestinian children who have been affected by this, who've been devastated by this, is absolutely stunning. Anyway, let's keep going. A diplomatic source has told Al Jazeera that Russia has sent a message to the UN Security Council saying that it considers the use of force in Yemen to be a violation of the UN Charter. This is important information, right? As we talk about diplomatic means, now suddenly the US is in the crosshairs of diplomatic scrutiny and maybe international accountability mechanisms. There's already talk that South Africa and other nations are going to also bring genocide charges against the United States for complicity with Israel. But now, as we talk about the strikes in Yemen, you're talking about another violation here. This is not good. This signals a few things. One, a growing outrage and disgust with the United States and Israel and other allies, surely the UK, surely France, surely Germany, but also a global tension that's expanding. We talked a little bit, and again, we'll talk about it later. But when you have Russia saying that, then you have Iran stepping up. Their foreign ministry spokesperson spoke out today, actually, early today. His name is Nasser Kanani. And he said that Iran condemns the US and UK's attacks on the Houthi sites. Now, of course, Iran has a vested interest in critiquing this, as they have a particular relationship to Shias and to Houthis in particular as supporters and funders of them. But it nevertheless it nevertheless speaks to something that might be deeply problematic. it speaks to a growing tension in the region. If Russia is speaking out, and Russia is clearly willing to fight proxy wars, and the United States is clearly willing to fight proxy wars, and Iran is speaking out vocally themselves, and other nations are speaking out vocally themselves, and you'll see even more speaking out soon. What started as a conflict in Gaza may turn into a full-scale regional conflict. The European Union is also beginning to. We'll see. Let's just say we'll see. I'll say that. But what Iran said was that the attacks were a clear violation of Yemen's sovereignty and territorial integrity and a breach of international laws. When you talk about sovereignty and integrity, territorial integrity, ironically, a framework, a legal framework, and a diplomatic framework that emerged out of 1967 in the War of 1967, the aftermath of the Six-Day War, where Israel emerged victorious. And UN Resolution 242 and 338 came, one to stop the bombing and one to talk about, again, respecting the state's right to exist, not as a Jewish state, but simply in terms of its sovereignty and territorial integrity. That framework and that language is very specific and very clear. And so when you start hearing countries say that you're violating sovereignty and territorial integrity, that sounds like the drums of war. That sounds like the drums of war. We'll talk about it more. I want to shout out a couple people here real quick, including Annie Lou. Thank you, Annie Lou, for writing in. You asked, what do you think the outcome of the ICJ will be? I don't know. I think that the ICJ will likely determine that Israel is guilty of genocide, unless there's a procedural reason. Unless there's a procedural reason why the case can't be seen. If we're talking about the merits of the case, I think Israel made a very weak defense. I think South Africa made a very compelling argument. And this has nothing to do with my politics. I could think Israel's wrong and still think they made a great defense. And Israel has sometimes made powerful legal defenses and legal maneuvers. This wasn't one of them. Not today. So what does that mean? It means that they'll be found likely guilty. That would be my prediction. And after they're found guilty, I think they blow it off and say, we don't care. I think there's no enforceability. I think there's limited enforceability. And I'm not confident at all that there will be anything substantive coming out of this from the legal perspective. What I am excited about, though, is, again, a growing case being made that Israel is violating international law and that the United States is complicit. The European Union Foreign Affairs High Representative Josep Borrell made a post, or we used to call them tweets back in the day. He criticized statements by Israeli officials that were calling for the voluntary displacement of Palestinians in Gaza. Voluntary displacement is wild language. But the reason why I'm pointing that out is because, Israel has been floating this idea of voluntary displacement, forced displacement. We've seen this before with Israel, with the African asylum seekers, where they've talked about self-deportation, right? Creating conditions so unlivable that people leave. And that's called ethnic cleansing. That's part of genocide oftentimes. And so to hear the European Union stand up and say that's wrong is important. To hear Anthony Blinken say that from the United States, Secretary of State say that is incredibly important. The more people who can stand up and speak out against this, the less likely it is that we can normalize the ethnic cleansing of Gaza. The fact that the surrounding Arab nations are not accepting Palestinians as part of some plan, right? That Jordan and Egypt aren't saying, hey, come on in, everybody, because they saw this in 1948, is also part of the global push to resist the ethnic cleansing of Gaza. This isn't happening as easily as I think Israel had thought or hoped. And that's important. That's a powerful thing. Palestinian Prime Minister Mohammed Shataya addressed a gathering at Nelson Mandela Square. Anybody's ever been there, it's a beautiful square with a wonderful statue of Nelson Mandela standing up. And they, of course, applauded South Africa for taking legal action against Israel at the ICJ. There's a growing solidarity framework here. There's a growing push here for people to stand up and speak out and recognize the commonality of our oppression. That it's not just linked circumstances and linked conditions of oppression, but also linked fates. That our liberation is bound up in the liberation of others. And the more we understand that, the more successful we'll be. Before we go, I want to just remind you all that the violence in Gaza is not restricted to Gaza, even for Palestinians. There are continuing clashes in the West Bank. I don't even like to use the word clashes because it kind of normalizes a discourse of equivalence. These are clashes. What's usually happening is Israeli forces are coming in and brutalizing Palestinians, and when they resist, they get brutalized more, and then we say there was a clash. An example of this comes in Nur Shams camp, which is in Tulkarem. It's east of Tulkarem. There was lots of violence. I didn't hear of any. We haven't heard of any deaths out of Nur Shams, but we did hear other forms of violence. Right. We also saw confrontations between Israeli forces and Palestinian resistors on Thursday last night when forces surrounded a house following a military raid on the village of Jabba, which is right south of Jenin. In the raid, Israeli forces shot and killed a former political prisoner. His name is Mejdi Fashafsha. He's 37 years old. They raided his house and they ended up shooting him. I don't know the details of the death. I can't speak to it. I don't want to overstate what I know, but I will say that we know for sure that Mejdi Fashafsha was killed. I won't say murdered. He was killed. And he was a former prisoner. But again, the language of former prisoner, which is often reported by the Israeli military, negates the fact that like almost every Palestinian male at some point is going to be either a former prisoner or a former detainee, right? The Palestinian male prison population, something like 40 to 60%, depending on who you ask. So it's no surprise. The language of prisoner doesn't mean a whole lot in Palestine in terms of making any kind of moral or ethical determinations. Settlers bulldozed a large tract of land belonging to Palestinian residents of Masafar Yatta, which is south of Khalil, or also known as Hebron. So we're continuing to see violence. We're continuing to see night raids. And we're continuing to see land destruction. This is what's happening even as the crisis in Gaza goes on. So the crisis in Gaza is really a crisis of all of Palestine, and it's one that we have to keep our eyes on. So on day 98, as the world continues to turn away or only focus on Israel's tepid defense at the ICJ, we're keeping you covered right here on the Marc Lamont Hill official YouTube channel. Make sure you check us out. Make sure you check out all the videos, including if you missed the proceedings from the ICJ. Later on today, we'll have the full 2-day proceedings for you. You can check those out and get all the information that you need. In the meantime, hit the like button. Hit the like button. Let them algorithms know that you care about what we're doing here. Let the algorithms know that you love what we're doing here. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. And I want to shout out some people who are already joining the channel, people who are members of the channel, people like Ben Vader. Shout out to you, Karima. We appreciate you. Thank you so much. Ben Vader and Karima. Bad Lefty, juror number 6. We love y'all out there, man. The work that y'all are doing. Corey T, my brother, thank you so much for being part of this. Again, Annie Lou, we appreciate you. Anybody who wants to be part of the channel, just hit that join button and you can be a part of the Marc Lamont Hill official YouTube channel. Also, if you want to support the channel financially, all you got to do is hit that Cash App button. Go to Cash App and do MLHTV, and you allow us to expand our programming, to grow what we do, to build what we do, to create space for more voices and more content. Anyway, family, I'll see you here later today. I'll be talking about Palestine and Black solidarity. I'll also be talking about some other stuff domestically, including pop culture stuff. Stay right here on the Marc Lamont Hill official YouTube channel. Peace.